digital, you can just shoot and shoot and shoot until your heart's content, until your card's full. But there's actually something about being more contemplative and thinking more about when you take the picture, being in the moment, so being part of the landscape and asking yourself, when do I feel is the right time to take this picture? Rather than making that decision afterwards when you're going in and you're looking at hundreds of pictures you've taken thinking, have I captured the moment? Actually, the moment should be here. You should feel it. So there's a couple of the books that I've made over the years. This is I guess the most recent in terms of a kind of monograph exploring our kind of national boundaries. So Merrie Albion is a work that brings together work from 2007, so the collapse of New Labour, the beginning of the coalition, through to 2017 and Brexit. And the last picture of the book looks at the day that we signed Article 50. So this was, I guess, the point where it became the kind of decision that we would turn our back from Europe and take on this kind of sovereign path forward, which of course now's, I think pretty much everybody can agree with a stupid decision. But for me, it was a case of thinking about how I could where I could be to make a photograph that talked about the issues at hand. And so I decided that I wanted to go somewhere which referenced this kind of historic conversation with Britain's borders. And this is Seven Sisters, and it's often used a bit like the White Cliffs of Dover as this depiction of this strong island nation. It was an image that was often used during the Second World War by the war artists, to show the troops that this is what we're fighting for, boys. And it was also something that more recently was taken on by the kind of Brexit Leave campaign as a similar idea that this is depicting this sense of our own sovereignty and we are strong on our own. We don't need this kind of sense of European collaboration. Felt to me like it was an important landscape to represent the different ideas that were being challenged. But what I've deliberately done is also try to create this sense of tension within the photograph. So here we've got somebody that looks perilously close to the edge. So that it feels like something dangerous or something could happen at any moment. It's also talking about turning away from something. It's also saying, well, what does this mean in terms of our kind of cultural heritage and what's going to be the consequences of this pretty seismic political decision. So this is one of those elements where I'm thinking beforehand about how I can try to share a particular sense of a place and then actually make the work afterwards. And Landscapes of a Small Island is a play on a book by Bill Bryson, American travel writer that is a British citizen and wrote a book called Notes on a Small Island. Small mentality, rather than thinking big, we're kind of shrinking the way that we consider ourselves and the consequences that will have and has had. So Brighton was a fishing village initially, and then the water was considered to be good for the well-being in the soul and for helping joints
And so over the years, it became a destination for the royal court where they'd come down. All of them were recorded as going to Devil's Dyke, but it was really the Victorians who kicked off, well, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and then the Prince Regent, who really started the pilgrimage of people coming from Brighton, from the sea, up to Devil's Dyke.
I'm interested in socio-cultural political issues, and I want to communicate those issues, and predominantly I use a visual medium to do that. I guess actually now the process for me is as interesting as the final result. The actual sense of being when you're making the work, to me, is almost now more important than it was in the past. In the past, it was very much about what I wanted to say. And now, in this time of complete madness, it's a refuge, I guess, to just make work and to hope that that work might have some interest to people, some cultural relevance, dare I say, some archival importance.
Legend goes that the devil was so angry about the number of churches that were being built in the Weald that he decided to flood the Weald of Sussex by digging a trench all the way to the sea so the water could rush through and drown the Christians of Sussex. But he saw a light, a lantern in the distance, and a flame flickering, thought that daylight was coming, and so fled. So a woman had lit her candle to scare the devil, and he'd fled and not returned. And so now we just have this trench, and at the bottom of the trench there's a kind of mound, which is apparently where the devil is now buried, under this mound. The reality, of course, it was an ice age thawing of a glacier and the sudden rush of water that ran down this chalk embankment, or created this chalk embankment, and kind of carved out this passageway through the landscape.
In 2004, I moved to Russia with my wife, and we spent a year just traveling across Russia. And that was the first time where I was really able to think about how to use the photograph as a way of creating a about a place or a people. And so that was a book that I published in 2007 called Motherland. And I came back to England after having made that work, seemingly to a country which was really starting to question who it was. You know, there was this debate about devolution in Scotland and Wales. The English seemed to be floundering around, not having much sense of what their own kind of identity was. You had the 7/7 bombing, which caused this huge conversation about why we were being attacked, you know, who were these kind of people within our borders that hated us so much. And there was this kind of politically a big change. You had the collapse of New Labour, the beginning of the kind of Conservative coalition. And it just seemed to me that I'd spent a lot of time of travelling away to make work. And now it was really important to begin looking at, you know, this place that I called home and what did it mean to me. And this is nothing new in terms of artists and writers. They've always kind of gone out to explore their own borders. And knowing that, you know, particularly within the visual medium, you know, you had a whole kind of tradition of British photographers and filmmakers looking at, questioning where they came from. For me to do the same, it was really important that I had a clear aesthetic visual which differed it from everything that had been done before. And so I guess that's where the idea of the landscape came in, because I was starting to kind of question what was I able to say about this place that was different to my forebearers. And this is where I started, I guess, bringing in kind of ideas from my past. What I loved about the Flemish Dutch painters was how they kind of looked at very naturalistic landscapes within Flemish borders. And they created this amazing kind of narrative of cast of characters within the landscape, whether that be a kind of urban or rural or, you know, a village scene. And then you had the kind of big history paintings that you might see in the National Gallery. William Powell Frith's Derby Day, this scene of the Epsom Derby. huge range of characters going to the races, up into the photography where you had the Düsseldorf school in Germany who were making these big prints like Gursky that were commenting on capitalism and the human condition and making these kind of large tableau prints. I was just bringing all these kind of different things together and then trying to constellate them, if you like, and decided that I would use this large format camera. I would take pictures from an elevated perspective. So I bought a motorhome where I could drive around the country, and then I'd always have this platform within which I could take the picture. And the idea was that I'd be surveying the landscape from a perspective that was different from Joe Public. By lifting the lens, the camera, you're then opening up the landscape and you're seeing how people integrate and use the landscape. So whilst the picture's very much about a place, about a physical space, it's also about the connection of who is using that landscape. Who are the people populating it? How are they using it? Why are they there? What are they wearing? What are they doing? What does it tell us about this particular time? Where's the tension in that landscape? So that was very much where this idea came from, and how I guess I then began being sat within what would be termed a landscape photographer. Even though I still feel that the pictures are more than that. They're kind of social studies. They're kind of tableau scenes of the human condition, if you like.
What's interesting about Flatford Mill in the National Trust have actually been managing the landscape to make it look more like it was in a Constable painting. Even though Constable's paintings would have been made from various different kind of pictures of the place, it would never have looked exactly how he's painted it. The body that now manages the landscape is deliberately trying to create a scene that echoes something that was never a reality. And of course, we then go to these places and we take a photograph and we experience it, and then we transmit this and sell this new idea of that this is what the past was. And this is where Brexit comes in, because there was a particular echo of the past. There was the selling of a particular landscape of Britain, the sense of what is lost. But often what is lost was never actually a reality. The countryside was a difficult place. It was a tough place. It would not have been a place of leisure for many people when Constable was painting. It was, it was hard graft. And yet now we see the countryside as somewhere that is a tourist attraction or a beauty spot or a place of cultural heritage, rather than something that is, something static, rather than something that's continually changing.
One of the interesting things about a photograph, of course, is it fixes time and place. And even looking now at the photographs I was making for We English, looking at how we use public spaces, nobody has a phone. And of course, you go back to these places now and the way that people inhabit the space and relate to that space and image themselves that space, the fact that we're all photographing and sharing and communicating, changes that experience of how we relate to the landscape. But it also means that the place looks very different. If I was to go now and photograph a music festival, there'd be much more security, there'd be much more CCTV, there'd be much more phones, there'd be much more tattoos, just in terms of the physical embodiment of how people look, drastically changed. And so, to some extent, these photographs become like ethnographic studies. They're fixing a particular history of the landscape.
When you take the photograph, so in here is a sheet of film, unexposed film. So this is a dark slide. So now that the film is behind the lens and I take this out, it's now ready to be exposed. But of course, what that means is that when I take the picture, I can't actually see anything. So I basically have to kind of memorize my frame. I know what's in the frame, and then it's really just then a case of waiting for the right moment. So here it's about, I'm kind of interested in the pathway of people moving through the landscape. And I'm considering the different kind of pockets. Is there an element of the landscape that I want empty, or do I all want it filled? Historic bench, and then either side of that we have these different groups of people. We've got the little tent shading the baby, we've got the walkers, the tourists, the locals, the internationals. You know, there's a real kind of nice mix of people using the space. Using this camera is different to an SLR or a modern mirrorless camera, because there's nothing inverting the image. So what I'm looking at is an upside down, back to front image of what's actually being projected through the lens. So that's just something that you get used to over time, you know, seeing an image in a completely different perspective from how you want it in the end. It's an extremely simple piece of equipment. You just have a lens, a bellow, and a plate of film, and very little else. There's no technology, no battery. When you're under the hood, you get to smell the lovely ebony wood. So there's something very romantic about using the camera. Something just so pure about the experience. One of the issues with this now is that the cost of film is so high. Now, of course, with digital, you can just shoot and shoot and shoot, and it, you know, until your heart's content, until your card's full. But there's actually something about being more contemplative and thinking more about when you take the picture, being in the moment, you know, so being part of the landscape and asking yourself, when do I feel is the right time to take this picture? Rather than making that decision afterwards when you're going in and you're looking at hundreds of pictures you've taken thinking, have I captured the moment? Actually, the moment should be here. You should feel it. And to some extent, because I'm photographing lots of people, there is no decisive moment, which is Henri Cartier-Bresson, the famous Magnum photographer, talked about the decisive moment, that magical moment where everything's in place. Now, it's very difficult when you're dealing with a landscape full of people to have a decisive moment. But I'm always looking for something that's in that moment that signifies what else is happening. I guess what they use the word punctum. It's something that kind of punctures that moment, that scene, and it gives it some sense of intrinsic value. Now, I've tried photographing digital here. You know, I've come back with my very expensive high-end digital camera, but there's something that I just cannot get that same sense of feeling than when I shoot with film. And I guess it's like watching a 4K movie. There's something that's almost hyper real. It's almost like the eye can't see as much data that's being projected at you. And so here there's something there's a softness, there's a color rendering, there's a sense of history that I don't feel that I get with a digital file. However much manipulation you do with it in terms of adding grain and various filters, it's just not the same. And I think that's also just about using the equipment, you know, the way that you interact with the camera, the way that the people in the scene are interacting with the camera, because it is to some extent a conversation, even if it's not a portrait. The way that the people interact with you changes. Once you put a hood over your head and you start using a loop and you take the hood off and then you put the film plate behind, it becomes a more gentle experience, and you can then enter into conversation with the people that you're photographing, or they just ignore you because they think you're photographing the landscape. Even though you're very conspicuous, that somehow over time you become inconspicuous. You know, I might be there for an hour before I actually take a picture. So actually the relationship in terms of making the work is one that is important. You can hear the birds, you can hear the traffic, you can smell the grass, you know, whatever it is, it all becomes part of that melding of making whatever it is you're trying to make. Now the question is, can you ever turn that experience into a two-dimensional object or a film or whatever it might be? Is it ever the same? And I guess this is what this new work has been about. It's about trying to ask that question. Is it always a constant failure because you're never quite reproducing that experience, which of course is an experience that changes every time you go there because the landscape changes every time you're there. Doing a project about Devil's Dyke, and I particularly love.
that.
Yeah, but I like a picture of you taking a picture of her.
Okay.
Yeah, so just you stay where you are with your camera,
Okay.
and if you do what you did.
Yeah. I'll remove this so that.
Okay. All right. It'll just take me 1 minute to set the camera up, and then
That's fine.
yeah. All right, now put your, okay, looking straight at the camera. Great, thank you, thanks. What brings you here?
She just wanted to see the place.
But do you study in Brighton or?
No, we are working.
We come from
here.
London.
Are you in London?
Came from London. We are working. Yeah.
Ah,
Nurse,
okay.
Yeah, we both are nurse. Yeah.
Are you
We're just a
nurses?
nurse, yeah,
Ah,
nurses,
that's
yeah.
interesting.
We are working in London, St. Mary's Hospital, London, and she works in Charing Cross.
Ah,
Hammersmith, yeah.
well, thank you for your service. Great, and I'll send you the picture. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
All right.
Nice meeting
Nice to meet you. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Are you going down or are you? When I was saying before, often I do quite a lot of planning where I know where I'm going. This is one of those pictures that just kind of happened. So I'm driving between two locations, I'm coming up this hill, and I pass this couple, this elderly couple sat by the side of the road, having a cup of tea. And I think, oh, this kind of is worth exploring. And so I drive up past them, I get my camera out, I take a picture of them gazing at the landscape. So you have these different perspectives. You have me looking at them and them looking at the landscape. And I've deliberately placed the car in the photograph because I don't want to make a timeless picture. So to some extent they're sat there because they're looking at this timeless scene, but I want to place this within a specific historical moment. And of course a car ages a picture, the number plate and the design of the car. After speaking to them, it turns out they've been coming to exactly the same place for 50 years. They often come on a Monday because that's when the road is the most quiet, so they see least traffic. And in those 50 years, they were saying that the only thing that's changed in their view, in this panorama, is a new tractor on the farm, and there's a green salt bin in the picture where you can see where the council have put salt if the road gets too icy. So there's these two little elements in this entire landscape, which are the only things they've seen transition in 50 years. But then, of course, if we look very closely at the picture, we can see the alpine trees, which would have been forested and planted at a particular time. You've got the dry stone walls, which would have been built part of the Enclosures Act, where the English landscape was parcelled up, if you like, into private ownership. And then, of course, you've got the geological time frame. So this picture has a passage of history through it, from the foreground and the car through the foreground, medium ground and the background. And so I kind of like that sense of this passage, this visual historical transition. And that's what I'm really trying to do with a lot of the photographs I make, is think about that conversation with the past. I'm excited when I'm challenged by something, where a perception is changed, whether that's the kind of mixed narrative that you get in films where time shifts and it kind of throws your particular sense of experience or expectation. I think that's a way of keeping people engaged in what otherwise could be just a surface representation. I'm not interested in creating anything that is just self-gratification that kind of just looks nice. There's plenty of things that are nice already. I'd quite like to create something that has some depth to it.